How's it going, guys? Coming back to you again on another lovely Thursday. As my intro music suggests, we've entered some strange days. Yes, the track by The Doors there, talking about some weird times, and that's kind of inspired me today, in part, to talk a little bit about some things that I find kind of strange and weird. First off, we will get into something that has come up repeatedly for some reason on YouTube. YouTube will generate suggested videos for you to watch if you utilize it a fair bit. For some reason, YouTube keeps suggesting that I watch videos about something called the brown note, or as I like to call it, the brown sound. So if you don't know what the brown sound is there, it's kind of a mythological type thing, an urban myth, I believe. I did do a deep dive into figuring out if there was any validity to this, but the story goes that supposedly the American military had worked on a weapon of sorts that was a device that would produce a frequency, a sound, somewhere in between 5 and 9 hertz, but that doesn't really matter. This is a sound that you would not be able to necessarily hear. However, it was reportedly would cause a physical disturbance in your enemy, and that is, it would cause you to poop yourself. So, like I said, it turns out this is a myth. No such device exists. And to be honest, I was a little bit disappointed, but I mean, there's a lot of merry pranksters out there that I think definitely should never get their hands on such a device because they'd be blasting it at everyone, I think. So that'd be a little dangerous. When I was looking into things, I did notice some sort of articles and things where some of this mythology might have come up. And one of those was about NASA. Early on, when NASA engineers were working on space flight in general, they were really worried about a lot of these lower frequency noises that would be produced from that vehicle in space. So they wanted to prepare the pilots and make sure that they could withstand these noises. And unfortunately, no brown sound was found. There was several physical things that did occur, though. A number of pilots found that they got quite ill physically, nausea. Some of them found some ataxia, shaking of their limbs uncontrollably. Some described visual disturbances and just an overall inability to complete tasks or to even communicate. So there is a big effect on certain sound, but no poop, unfortunately. So there is, as far as I can tell, no weapon in existence to cause people to lose their shit. So, and I even tracked down an old episode of the show Mythbusters, if you know it, and they tested this theory out as well. One of their guinea pigs sat in front of a bunch of large speakers and had different sounds blasted at him. He reported all sorts of things, but none whatsoever in regards to bodily functions in that regard. All right, so like I said, we're going into some weird stuff today. Here's some more weirdness. This is actually another, not so much a song, but a sound as well. I will sort of put a caveat out there. I'm going to play this sound Now, if you're under 30, you very well will be able to hear it. If you're over 30, sorry, you probably will not be able to hear it. So this is comes to us from a device that's marketed for anyone to use, but it's often used in certain cities and parks and places where the youngins like to congregate and vandalize things and do drugs or whatever, and they're trying to get these kids to skedaddle. A device is employed called the mosquito. So the mosquito produces a sound, and I can't remember the frequency, but it doesn't really matter. It's been explained to me that as we age, our ability to perceive certain sounds tends to wane. And it appears that this particular sound, as I mentioned, over 30, most people do not experience anything. They don't hear it. So for the youngins that can hear it, they find it quite irritating, and the idea is that they will move on because they can't hang out with this irritating sound in their ear. I played it for myself and my family members. I was able to detect something actually when I heard it through headphones, and it was quite a nuisance. The teenagers in my life immediately kind of like shirked away, and they're like, "Oh, turn it off!" So it does appear to work. My lady friend could hear nothing when I played it to her, and so she thanked me for reminding her that she was old. But anyway, I'm going to play a little 30-second snippet of it. So like I said, if you're under 30, you might not hear anything. But for those of you that are under 30, you may be able to hear it. So I can actually hear something right now, and it's actually really bothering my ears. So maybe I am younger than my years. I don't know. Anyways, believe me, there was something playing there if you didn't hear anything, and it is quite an irritant. So a lot of controversy has come up around this. The shop owners and different people that use it say that it's a great way to deter the youngsters from hanging out where they're not wanted, and acting out in antisocial behavior and vandalizing things, and in general just being a nuisance. But many people say it's discriminatory against the youth and should not be allowed. As far as I know, there are no laws against using such a device. So, maybe some of the older peeps around could invest in such a device instead of yelling, "Hey, you kids, get off my lawn." You could just blast one of these out there, and sure enough, they will move on. Anyway, I thought that was a crazy one. I really enjoyed kind of experimenting on my family as well, and it does seem to work. So, yeah, interesting, right? Anyways, moving on to some more weirdness, I thought I would talk a little bit about some kind of experimental music, I guess, and in particular, a gentleman from back in the day, and he's a Canadian. This guy, actually gave us a lot, but he's not really recognized very much. And there's museums with devices that he's created, and people who celebrate him. However, I doubt any of you have even heard this guy. His name is Hugh LeCain, famous Canadian, and yet most people don't know him. So this guy was a brainiac, a physicist for most of his life, but he always had a side hustle, and that was making weird sounds. He was obsessed with it from the time he was very young, and he actually developed a little device called the electronic sackbut. Not so sure about the name there, but I could tell you a little bit about it. Um, it is effectively the world's first synthesizer. That's usually attributed to uh, the Moog company for developing that. And yet, one of our very own had put something out there in the world long before, and I mean long before. We're talking back late 1940s to 1950s is when he really got his start messing around with this stuff. So he experimented with all sorts of different things. I think ultimately he invented 20 some odd different instruments, but the sackbut was one of his electronic sackbut was one of his first. So we'll get into that one. But I did find a piece of music that I guess he's most famous for. Now, it's not like a regular song by any means, but I just want to put it into context what this guy was working on. So this song he created, I mean, could be called an experiment more than a song. He developed by recording the sound of a single drop of water into a bucket. And then he manipulated that with a machine, and I don't remember what he called this machine, but there are many these days that are often referred to as sequencers. And they're used in all kinds of music, everything from Pink Floyd to different electronic 90s dance songs. But anyways, I'll play that. This song is called Dripsody, hence the drop of water. And it's quite short, and you'll hear it. So this came out in 1955. Hugh LeCane, a Canadian weirdo, as you could say. It gets weirder. Wait for the end of it there. Oh, it's longer than I thought. Pretty weird stuff there, yes? Wowzers! Turn that down a little bit, it's messing with my mind. So, that's Hugh LeCane, man, messing around with some weirdness, like I said, all the way back in 1955. So, that's the same year that this came out, man. This is what was going on in popular music. And I mean, people lost their mind with this one. Thinking it was the devil's music and all this kind of thing. Imagine the chaos that would have ensued if Hugh LeCane had released his madness onto the world with his crazy electronic tunes there. Yeah, I don't think the world was ready for it. A man ahead of his time, for sure. Definitely dabbling in some craziness there. So I'll play a little bit as well of some more of Hugh LeCane's weirdness. This is him actually performing on his electronic sackbut, i.e., the first synthesizer that I know of, anyways. And it's going to be some weirdness, no doubt about it. Very foreign, strange, ethereal notes coming out of this thing. So yeah, I mean, the man spent decades developing different instruments and messing around with the elements of sound and modulating those sounds. He actually early on ended up helping in developing the first radar systems in Canada, actually. So the man left his mark on the world. But I don't think they were ready for his manipulation of sound necessarily, shall we say. So yeah, the man produced this craziness long before Robert Moog, who was the, often recognized founder of electronic synthesizers. And I wanted to show you a picture of this crazy thing because it is not a beautiful masterpiece, that's for sure. It looks like, I don't know, a tinkerer's nightmare or something. There's a picture of it in all of its glory. I mean, it's all kind of ramshackled together there. Pretty weird. And yeah, that was Hugh LeCane, a Canadian that has kind of long since been forgotten, but a man ahead of the curve nonetheless. So I found that one kind of groovy. All right. Next up, we could dive into another sort of electronic instrument that I'm guessing you might have heard before. Often it is seen as more of a novelty item, although there are some enthusiasts of this instrument today. And this was invented over 100 years ago. I believe it's the first electronic instrument of all time. And I've always found this kind of thing pretty intriguing because it's just to watch someone play it, it's very different. Normally if you're playing an instrument, you're whacking things with sticks or strumming strings, or there's some kind of tactile feedback there. You're touching stuff, you're hitting it and playing it. Well, in this case, we're talking about the theremin. And if you don't know what a theremin is, like I said, you've probably heard it before. But I will play an early composition utilizing one of these. Very famous thereminist, I think they're called, someone who plays a theremin, named Clara Rockmore, playing with some other people. So there's other instruments there, but I'll try to point out the theremin. Now, the theremin produces this weird, almost vocal kind of sound. And I'll wait. There you go. It's really odd sounding. And the way it works is that there's these rods and metal things coming out of this box that when the player puts their hands or their limbs near it, they affect the sound that it emits through like electromagnetism or something. I don't even know how it works, to be honest. And it's very weird. Where you might have heard this, although it's found its way into modern musical pieces, you definitely would have heard it if you think back to like old black and white horror sci-fi films and stuff. They would often use it when the UFOs were coming in and stuff like that. So pretty weird sounds though, right? And it's very cool. I've always been intrigued by the theremin. Jimmy Page loved it. He often would bring one, or a smaller sort of simpler version on stage when they were playing with Led Zeppelin there, and he would bust out a little bit. One of the sort of popular songs that utilized this was Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys. And I'll zoom it in to where I want to be there. Coming right up. I'm picking up good vibrations. Hear that high-pitched weirdness? That is, of course, a theremin making its way into popular music. So, anyway, very strange instrument, created by this Russian, once again, a physicist by the name of Leon Theremin. At least that's how he was known in the West. He has a far more Russian-sounding name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. And, yeah, there's some weirdness around all of it. He came to the West to introduce his instrument to the world, and, initially people picked it up and thought it was going to be the next big thing. And, there was all kinds of newspaper articles, and, but yeah, it kind of went by the wayside, like a lot of new technology, like the Segway, if you guys remember those things you could ride around on by how you leaned. for the Google Glass, which was supposed to be this new big wearable technology that didn't really pan out. Kind of went by the wayside, just similar to those things. So, I think Leon had some images of everybody owning one of these. It was so simple to play, he said, and that, every home in North America he hoped would have one. Well, that was not the case. I'm pretty sure some of you probably didn't even know what the heck a theremin was, let alone owning one. So you can still get them. In some forms, it's a kit that you have to put together yourself, which could kind of be a fun project. But yeah, the theremin, man. Very, very strange, wacky stuff. I still love it, though. Right, moving on. Oh, and I forgot to talk a little bit about some extra weirdness. So there was a Russian connection there, the inventor being a Ruski. There was a backstory that sort of led people to believe that he was some sort of spy, and his whole plan for bringing his wacky instrument to the West was in order to pilfer secrets from other countries. And I don't think there's any truth to that whatsoever, but who knows? We'll never know, I guess. Anyways, moving on. Next up, I thought we could get into a little bit more on the electronic side, a little bit more about some other stuff, but I'm going to pull up an interview from my man Jim Morrison of The Doors, and this was back, I want to say 1969. The man kind of predicted a trend that he felt would be seen down the road in modern music, and the guy called it. I will
Basic types of music indigenous to this country are the black music, blues, and the kind of folk music that was brought over from Europe, and what I guess they call it country music, or the kind of West Virginia high and lonesome sound. Those are the two main streams of root American music. There might be others, I don't know. But like 10 years ago, what they called rock and roll was kind of a blending of those two forms. I guess in 4 or 5 years, the new generation's music will be, it'll have a synthesis of those two elements and some third thing that'll be entirely, maybe it'll be, it might rely heavily on electronics, tapes. I can kind of envision maybe one person with a lot of machines, tapes, and electronic setups, singing or speaking and using machines.
There we go. I think the man called it. The idea of someone performing on stage with nothing but a bunch of electronics all around them. That happens all the time nowadays, right? This guy, I'm going to play a little snippet of. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple years ago. But this dude would perform to massive crowds. And they got him on Avicii. And you probably heard this song on the radio. It got a lot of airplay for a while.
Feeling my way
But,
through the dark.
That's how he produced these songs, was just with a bunch of electronics all around him. Different keyboards and effects and samplers and all the like. So Jim Morrison, man, definitely a weirdo, but he knew some stuff, man. That's exactly what happened with modern music. I mean, like I said, this guy, Avicii, when he was alive, was performing to like packed concert halls and stadiums even. So Jim's predictions, I think, could be seen as being somewhat foreshadowing, but also scary to some. And this is a long-standing sort of theme with technology, music for sure, but just technology in general. This idea that, you know, I mean, every other day I read an article where someone's suggesting that, you know, robots are taking over the workforce and we're going to be out this many jobs. And I don't know. I'm not too worried there. I mean, robotics have found their way into a lot of things, and yet we just continue to evolve. People, for the most part, find different ways to work around the robots. And let's face it, there's a lot of examples of where I don't think they're really taken over. You know, things like the Roomba, if anyone's used one of those. It's like a little robotic vacuum sort of thing that, you know, scours your floors and cleans them up. They don't work terribly well. I mean, it's a good addition to your regular cleaning, but I always cite a young man who lived on a single-floored home and one day had left his Roomba scooting around the floors of his home and went to work. Well, it turned out that his doggo had a little accident on the floor, and so for the remainder of the day, the Roomba proceeded to roll on through his dog's doo-doo and smear it throughout the entire home. So that's the macabre scene that he came home to. So yeah, Roomba's not taken over. They're no Rosie, the robotic maid that we were promised for the future. You know, I read a report about a robot called Flippy that was going to take over flipping hamburgers in restaurants, and I don't believe that's taken over at McDonald's across the nation or anything like that. So yeah, and then of course there was an infamous portion of Jeopardy where a computer went up against some of the all-time champions, including Ken Jennings, and it was named Watson, and Watson ultimately won that series. So that was pretty amazing to watch. But yeah, I thought we'd get into some examples of how I don't think we need to worry too much. But there are some artists out there producing music where a lot of it is created by what's called artificial intelligence, so robots, if you will, and programs. And you know, some might get upset. There's a lot of exaggeration in the media. News reporters will do stories and say, oh, you know, so and so, this one young lass, Taryn Southern, that I'm going to talk about, produced an album entirely created by artificial intelligence. It's not entirely true. I listened to an interview by her recently, and she did. She used a lot of technology to develop her songs that were based on artificial intelligence, but there still had to be a human touch. It didn't quite get there. So she put out an album a couple of years back called I Am AI. And she's a young lass that's been obsessed with technology for most of her life. She was one of the very first YouTubers, and she really developed, you know, a lot of stuff online. So it's no wonder that she put out this album. I'm going to play a little snippet of it, and then I'll talk a little bit about how it was actually developed. So this song's called Life Support.
Look up now in the distance, what have we become? Faded lights, desert skies, have we come undone?
Alright, I'll tune that down a little bit. So, I don't know, pretty good song. Well written as far as many people are concerned. And yeah, it turns out the musical drop back to that is that it was created by a couple of software tools that are out there. One called Amper, which enables someone just to simply input a bunch of stuff. What kind of key you want a song to be in, how fast you want it to be, a whole bunch of different parameters, and then what kind of style you might want it in. And this program will just produce a song. And you then can change it from that point and get it to reiterate another version that's tweaked a bit, and continue doing that until you get something that you really like. So she used that in another company called Ava. And we'll get into Ava a little bit later, but Ava does a similar thing there, and is kind of known for having some of the world's first albums put out there entirely done by AI. And so there are a lot of symphonic type songs, but anyways, pretty cool stuff. I don't think they're taken over at all. She still had to make up her own lyrics and put those on there. That part gets tough. The lyrics, artificial intelligence struggles with. But there are a few companies out there dabbling in this idea. There's one company called OpenAI that put out a product called Jukebox, I believe it's called, and I'll play a snippet of that in a sec. It's weird. So the way that company works is that it gets inputted with all sorts of music of a specific artist or genre, and it listens to it and then will attempt to generate its own version of that style of music or that particular artist. And it's pretty glitchy, and it is definitely weird. I listened to a few of these tracks and was like, what the heck? The lyrics are strange. They don't always make sense. They don't always sound entirely human or like the artist they're supposed to sound like. So I'll play a snippet of a tune called Mitosis. For those of you that are not biology nuts, mitosis has to do with the division of cells, I believe. I think I seem to remember learning about that back in school. So this is supposed to be a Elvis tune, or in the style of Elvis. I can't see Elvis singing about cell division and stuff like that, but anyway, that's what the computer produced. So I'll play a little snippet of it. It's weird, like I said. Definitely not taking over for humans.
From dusty tanny, almost scarred, with the lip hitch tells the heart. When my closeness, when my health is the time. At last, when he woke up to the mind.
Weird stuff. And that last line, and last we woke up with a mind. Weird. What the heck is going on? That was a strange one. Like I said, no worries about the naysayers that are afraid that, these computers are going to take over and there'll be no real artists out there anymore. I don't believe it for a second. But nonetheless, an interesting experiment, to get into seeing just what it is. One last sort of example of some of this weirdness is a band not made of humans either, a group called Compressor Head. Compressor Head is a band composed solely of robots, and I'll play a snippet of their tune called These Bots Are Made for Rocking, and I'm sure you'll be able to figure out pretty soon who they're parroting or covering. Of course, Nancy Sinatra's These Boots Were Made for Walking. It's a far more rockin' rendition. So, if I remember, I will link a a little YouTube video for you guys to check out if you want to, so you can actually see these robots performing. Now, the important thing to note is that they have to be programmed to do each of these, play these instruments and sing these songs. It's not like they're just creating music. We're a long ways off from that as far as I know, but kind of a novelty sort of thing. It's sort of fun to check out a little bit of. I certainly wouldn't go to a performance of robots, but you know, like I said at the top of the hour, man, strange times, right? Strange times for sure. So, with all of that weirdness, you know, I was looking into this idea of robots taking over and mechanical music versus real human performances, and the idea's been around for a long time. There's all sorts of devices. Way back in the day, many saloons possessed what was called an orchestrion. An orchestrion is basically like one of those old school pianos when fed with a long piece of paper with different holes in it would cause gears to move and play certain pieces on that piano. But an orchestrion also has more than that going on. There would be drums and all sorts of different instruments that would all perform just with the turn of a crank or a push of a button. I'll play a little bit. This is a Wurlitzer from back in the early 1900s, I believe, maybe late 1800s. So yeah, big box, all these instruments in it, and it would play automatically, right? Not really a robot, but a sort of automatic kind of thing that would run on its own once it got started. So, believe it or not, even with the inception of these types of technology, I guess you could call it technology, right? Some people were freaking out already with these kind of things. Also, the idea of even like a music box, if you've ever had one of those where you just turn a crank and little pegs on a spool will hit tongs and play a song, even that kind of concept made some people a little worried, including this man, John Philip Sousa, a very famous marching band composer, and you would know a lot of his stuff, I guarantee. A lot of real patriarchal America kind of stuff. I'm going to play this one because it's one of my favorites. This always makes me think of something not so American. Monty Python's Flying Circus. I believe this is their theme song, and this was a John Sousa jam. So I found an article that John Philip Sousa had written all the way back in 1906, and I thought I would share a little bit of it just to show you that, you know, the paranoia about machines taking over and including in music, have existed since long before our days. So this was an article that John Philip Sousa wrote called The Menace of Mechanical Music. And it goes a little something like this. Sweeping across the country with the speed of a transient fashion in slang or Panama hats, political war cries, or popular novels, comes now the mechanical device to sing for us a song or play for us a piano in substitute for human skill, intelligence, and soul. Only by harking back to the day of the roller skate or the bicycle craze, when sports of admitted utility ran to extravagance and virtual madness, can we find a parallel to the way in which these ingenious instruments have invaded every community in the land. And if we turn from this comparison to pure mechanics to another, which may fairly claim a similar proportion of music in its soul. Anyways, he goes on and on like that. It's a long article. Yeah, he was paranoid, man. He thought these instruments were an abomination. I do find it interesting that he even, mimics or not mimics, but mentions bikes and what else, roller skates as being this, new technology that was infecting our youth and causing them to go to extremes that shouldn't be. We shouldn't have wheels attached to our feet. That's evil and crazy, So it shows you over time how we get used to things and don't think they're such a big deal, right? But I did find that interesting that he was so worried about these mechanical devices, what he would do with what's going on today. Am I right? I don't think he could deal, that's for sure. Right. So, moving on. Don't know if I have much more to get into. There was, let's just close out with a little piece. Now, I mentioned that company Ava, as they're called, and this particular piece was created entirely by Ava, and so pretty cool. Doesn't sound very computer-esque to me. I can almost feel the soul of it, and yeah, it's kind of neat. So, anyways, on the idea of weirdness at the top and strange days in the world of music, I think I could have spoke for an eternity. There's a lot out there, but I thought, some of the AI stuff needed to be looked at because there's a lot of misinformation. And I've started to look at even maybe messing around with some of this on my own just for pure interest's sake. So look out, maybe my robot friends will be releasing some music onto the world someday. I'll let you know. Anyways, guys, it's been a blast. Yeah, man. Take care of yourself and everyone in your fams. And yeah, hope to see you guys soon. Take care, y'all.